Hey guys, this is Lucio here. Wanted to give you a quick development update, so let's just get right into it. What I have right here, these are pre-wired gloves, the ones that are normally found on the market, also known as e-gloves, wannabes, a bunch of different stuff. So when we look at the bulbs themselves, they don't use individual RGB bulbs, also known as 4-leaf bulbs. They don't use IC bulbs. They're actually individual red, green, and blue. I think these are 3mm bulbs. There's no form of color mixing, and when they do show two colors at the same time, there's no real definition or blend. One of the most common reasons as to why these gloves break is because of these solder points right here. Now it's good that they're trying to insulate them, but the thing is even with the hot glue adhering the bulbs to the liner, when you bend, these solder points still are exposed to tension and stress, and therefore they break. And as you can see, one of these bulbs is actually already broken. That's why I cut this open. When you look at the finger itself, it features 6 wires down each finger. That's additional bulk, and all the wires themselves are hot glued to the inside liner. So if the glove itself gets dirty, you have to wash it and break it, or you just can't wash it at all. When we get down to the chip itself, it's a very simple chip. What they do is they actually take 5 wires, one from each finger, spin it into a single point, and solder it directly to the board. So if you were to bend or move this over time, these will eventually break, and there's no form of stress relief connected to the chip itself. These are several of the reasons as to why these gloves break, and let me show you some of the things we're doing differently to combat that. So first thing I'd like to point out is the type of wire that we're using. This is a very, very high quality aerospace grade wire. Most flat cable uses 7 strands of copper inside of it. This holds, I believe, over 40 or 60 strands inside of each individual wire, which means it's extremely flexible. The insulation itself is made of silicon, so it's very different than normal PVC jackets. Extremely flexible, very expensive cable. The cost of this cable alone, it probably matches the cost of the pre-wired gloves I was showing you earlier. One thing we do with the wires too is we actually split these up. That way it's much more flexible, feels like strands when you're moving it in your hand, and it's not tied up. Like if you leave these together in a flat cable, it's a bit stiffer. So this is what's called an IDC connector. The nice thing about these connectors is that they have stress relief clips, what you see right here. So when you do exhibit stress on the connector, it's very tough, and it evenly distributes it along the connector. The only downside to these IDC connectors is they're kind of big. So when I compare it to, for example, the size of the board we're going with, it adds some extra length to the board. And this is what we kind of wanted to try to avoid. We're trying to keep this thing as small as we possibly can go, and that's really based around the battery. But what I'll show you next is the connectors we're experimenting with right now. So this is the Infiny chip in its latest version right now. The difference is we're using these very low profile right angle connectors rather than the IDC connector. That way we're not dealing with coming off the board so much. We can actually push the connector back and save you some length. I really like these connectors just because they're modular. We can actually keep the 4 main fingers on one connector, and then keep the thumb on the bottom. So that way we can replace either one at our own right, and we can kind of stack the wires together so a bit more compact. Just to give you a bit of a walked in with the chip itself, this is a micro USB connector. You'll find this connector on pretty much any smartphone made within the last 1.5–2 years. So if you have a phone that's not an iPhone, most likely you already have this cable. Then to the left of that is the power switch. So when you have the power switch in the off position, that's going to just keep the gloves off. When you have the glove in the off position and you have your micro USB cable plugged in, then that's going to be charging. While the cable's plugged in, if you switch it on, then you'll be able to experiment with the glove, turn it on, play with colors while it's not using battery power. And then when you leave the glove on and you have it unplugged, it'll be used like normal. On the back here, this is where the thumb switch is at, and also the battery contact for the battery. So that what you do is you take the glove, you set it inside of your casing, and then you take your cell phone battery and hinge it into place like so. And that's mostly kind of how it works. But something that we did lack with this connector versus the IDC connector is the form of stress relief. And so we were going to change the casing design to account for that, which I'll show you right now. So after you set the chip inside of the casing, you can drop the battery in, hinge it in right here. And then to give you an idea of what form of stress relief we're going to use to replace, we basically have the wires wrap into this little loop so that the casing itself would act as the form of stress relief. So to come back to the design of using these low profile connectors, they're really awesome. I really wish that we could actually stick with using these connectors, but the downside to using these is that they're extremely expensive. And for us to use these connectors with the high quality cable that we're using, there are some conflicts. Most likely we're going to have to go back to using the IDC connector. So the chip itself is going to be a bit larger than we really want it to be, but in the end I think it'll be a bit simpler to use, and the form of stress relief in the clip is going to be the most original and legitimate form of stress relief. So it'll be the strongest thing that you guys can play with. But anyways, thanks for taking the time to check out this video. I look forward to hearing from you guys, and can't wait to show you guys Lucia and our latest version of the working gloves.